12-tone can't analyze music. You know, Cory from the YouTube channel 12-tone, he can't analyze music. We will demonstrate this in the following video in these 3 parts. In part 1, we're going to look at a case study of 12-tone Cory's video about the Police song Message in a Bottle. 12-tone incorrectly identifies the tonic home bass note of 1 in that song, and by extension that it skews the data so many of the other observations that stem from that are also just totally out in left field, divorced from what's actually happening in the song. Now, in part 2 of this video, we're going to step back from that individual example and look at how 12-tone's music analysis methods are themselves fundamentally flawed. So it is his process itself that is leading him to arrive at these faulty conclusions. And finally, in part 3 of this video, I will be delivering 12-tone Cory his sentencing, which will specify what he needs to do in order to atone for this situation. Okay, so let's jump right into this, guys. Let's take a look at the beginning of 12-tone's video with his commentary on the particular chord structure of the opening progression.
And the first thing I want to highlight is the chord shapes because they're a little unusual. If they were normal triads, it'd sound something like this, with a root, a fifth, and then a really high third, but instead they've taken these top notes and lowered them all, hiding the chord's qualities and giving the whole thing a bit of an unsettled sound. It's a great use of a technique called quintal harmony, where chords are built from stacks of fifths instead of the usual stacks of thirds.
Alright, so he's starting out with what he is terming quintal harmony. Now, it may very well be true that this is quintal harmony, but one thing you're going to find on this channel, and being that he's a disciple of Adam Neely, is an overzealous urge to slap a fancy term on any and everything. We need the fanciest, most in-depth nomenclature possible. And so you can say this is quote-unquote quintal harmony because those 3 notes are all fifths, but I think that's reading too into it. It's just as simple as, for each of the 4 chords in this progression, you're getting root, fifth, and then the 9th. So that's the song telling you right off the bat that that D sharp is the 9, so the 2, the supertonic, not the leading tone. So being quick to call this quintal harmony, but really that's just a multisyllabic way to say first, fifth, 9th. The root in the 5th establishes the core of the triad, and then we're getting the 9th. Will Cory 12-tone pick up on it as the 9th?
Still though, they behave pretty much like normal chords here, so for the rest of the video I'm just gonna pretend the progression is this. This confused me for a while because when I listened to the song, none of these sound like the 1 chord, and I think that's because none of them are.
So the way he cues that up, because I think that none of them are. He's bringing out that Adam Neely sassy voice. It's like he's getting out in front of the fact that he anticipates that people will disagree with him, so he's having to suggest if I think none of them are. So what's fascinating about this is he's presenting these 4 pretty clear-cut chords presented in root position with a 9th, and so Cory is here having to say, well, let's just pretend that it's these chords. C sharp minor, A, B, F sharp minor. Well, buddy, there's no reason to pretend. That's exactly what those chords are. Don't get caught up in the technical thrill of quintal harmony that you feel the need to identify these as some other exotic chord. It's just a C sharp minor chord with a 9th. We call those non-chord tones. Because Cory is not able to pick these 9ths up for the non-chord tones that they are, he is then spelling out the explicit straightforward chord progression and saying, it's not quite this, but it is, bro. And so the fact that he is openly acknowledging that he was confused for a while about this, that should tell him right off the bat that there's something not quite right with this.
Here, check out the second phrase of the melody. Hear how that D sharp at the end is pulling up with all its might? That's because it's what's called a leading tone, and it wants to resolve to the root of the key, E.
Okay, so now he's talking about that note, which I've previously identified as the 9, so in other words, the 2, and he's just outright calling that the leading tone already on the assumption that the key of the song is E, despite the fact that he has provided 0 justification or context for why he thinks the song is in the key of E major. Well, how did you get there? When did you decide that the key of the song was E? You skipped a step. You provided no justification for, and now he's just jumping ahead. 12-tone has not said the mode of this song. You can deduce by what he's saying that the mode of this song would be Ionian. which is just another word for a major key. He skipped that step. He's taking it for granted. So, spoiler alert, the song is not in Ionian, it's in Aeolian. C-sharp Aeolian, another word for C-sharp minor. That's the key of the song. Now, the reason why his commentary is so obnoxious here is because he is admitting that it confused him at first, but he has done nothing to articulate, like, the potential options. Well, what are the leading contenders? He doesn't even articulate that. And if he thinks the key of the song is E major, well, the relative minor of that would be that C-sharp minor. Why would he not even consider that, not even gauge that against the melody? It's borderline suspicious. It seems that he made up his mind that the key of the song is E because it fits with the lyrical thematic narrative that he is going to project onto these harmonic data points. It is highly suspicious that he would not so much as suggest that it might be in the key of C-sharp minor. So, after watching this video 2 or 3 times to figure out his thought process, this is borderline dishonest obscuring of the data that is inconvenient to his thesis, which is shameful. He is then incorrectly attributing the role of that D-sharp note to be the leading tone. And he doesn't even stop there. He ascribes agency to this D-sharp as, oh, you can listen to it, see how it really wants to resolve, and there should be no doubt about the way that it's the 2, because you hear it as the 9 in that opening chord. Now, there is no excuse for 12th tone to have such an egregious blind spot, because he got his college degree in this stuff. This is basic starter music theory info. You know that it's not the leading tone by the way that it is used, as the way the song develops in that moment, especially at the end of the vocals on those verses. So the first verse wraps up with, right, landing unresolved on that 2, which we know it to be the 2, right next to the 1. Okay, but then if you jump forward to the conclusion of verse 2, well, it's not going to land on that D sharp, which is the 2. It's actually going to resolve to the 1. It's going to reveal and acknowledge and land upon the tonic that is crystal clear to the rest of us. It's when Sting says, "Love will break your heart." 3, 1. The fact that 12-tone Cory would not even acknowledge the way that that melody evolves in verse 2 to then arrive at the actual tonic of the song, the C sharp, he is providing a deceptively limited glimpse at the song's content in order to support his own personal thesis.
Well, I think it's a variation of this classic progression, often called the doo-wop changes. This is like the definitive example of functional harmony, which, as we've mentioned before, is the idea that different chords in a key have different functions or jobs to do. These first 2 chords have tonic function, which means they provide a sense of rest. They're like home base. Then we go to this chord, which has subdominant function, meaning it adds some instability and takes you away from home. Then this chord has dominant function, which means it points you back. This predictable cycle of tension and release has been used for centuries, but it was especially common in the pop music of the 50s and 60s. The Police do it a little differently, though. They start here, and when we're on the dominant chord, expecting a resolution back to 1, they go to F sharp minor instead, which has subdominant function again.
Alright, so this moment right here is as emblematic of any of the counterproductive interference which, left unchecked, can prevent a person from accurate music theory analysis that they would be afforded otherwise. 12-tone Cory has spent so much of his time and attention in music theory classrooms and following up with academic discussions of this time, trying to contextualize any and everything that he finds in the entire history of music that he's encountered everywhere else. So he's looking at what I'm going to demonstrate is a very clear-cut, more straightforward chord progression. He's saying, oh, this chord sequence is kind of like the doo-wop changes. And when you get to that B, your ear is expecting the E, but then the song swerves to F sharp minor. 12-tone Cory, that is ridiculous. No one is expecting that. Anyone hearing the song for the first time up to this point is just hearing it cycle through those 4 chords. The only chords that the listener will quote-unquote expect is to just continue that same pattern of 4 chords that was established at the beginning of the song and continues repeating, like so. Okay, that's 4 chord. And now that we know that the tonic of the song is C sharp minor, This is a very, very straightforward chord progression in the Aeolian mode, the natural minor mode, 12-tone Cory. You're overthinking it. Listen to this very basic Aeolian chord progression. 1, 6, 7, 4... right? It's using the natural minor keys 4 chord even. This is so not exotic or unusual at all. But Cory is taking the wealth of data and precedent in his mind, and he's saying, based on everything else I've learned in a classroom, I expect the next chord of that progression to go to E, but it swerves to F sharp minor. Cory, 12-tone, you have forgotten the face of your father. You've lost sight about what music is and how it's experienced by others. You are projecting and importing all of these other totally unrelated songs and contexts onto this very simple chord progression that's pretty much guys hanging out in their garage and doing a basic 1-6-7-4 progression. And then it loops back to the start. So how does it loop back to the start on the 1 chord? Well, that's just a plagal cadence. As people in the comments of his video have pointed out, much to 12-tone Cory's dismissal. Okay, so what happens next in the song is that we get to the next part where he's singing, I sent an SOS to the world. Okay, and this actually is a key change, which 12-tone Cory does correctly identify, where we had previously been in the key signature of C sharp minor, which is, tragically, for 12-tone's case, the same key signature in its relative major of E major. Okay, but now we're changing key to A. So now we're changing key to A, which was the 6th chord, but now it's the 1 that we've modulated, and what we're getting here is a simple 3-chord song, 1-4-5. I sent an SOS to the world. Okay, so 12-tone is seeing this E chord, which is now the 5 chord where we've changed key, and he's saying, oh, that's the E that we were quote-unquote trying to get to in the first part. That was the true tonic from before, but now we're hitting that chord in a different context, the context of the key of A major. At most, what you can say is that this E chord that it arrives at exists as the relative major to the C sharp minor key that we were in just a little earlier. But that does not mean that the opening chord progression was continually clawing and trying to return to the tonic home base 1 that Cory asserts is here on E major. Most of what Cory bases his decisions on are the melody, but even that's a huge problem because he's only tunnel visioning on particular points of the melody when there are many other examples in the song that he seems to deliberately omit because they're inconvenient to his theses.
This subverts your expectation, adding dissonance when you're expecting a chance to rest, and then it jumps to the C sharp minor and starts over without ever actually playing the E. I think there's something really poignant about the fact that in this song about a castaway, even the chords can't seem to find their way home.
So why is he so insistent on it being in the key of E, which it almost never even goes to that chord? It's because it fits with the pre-existing narrative that he decided on at one point and was unwilling to challenge. So he is now going to cherry pick things that suggest this pipe dream of his that the key is E major.
Next we get this. This is the I hope that someone gets my bit, and moving away from the root again helps emphasize that desperation. Even the fake home we constructed in the first half of the pre-chorus is fading away. Finally we get to the chorus, which is a bit ambiguous.
It's not ambiguous at all. Holy smokes, Batman. This is 3 notes that are clearly conforming to C sharp Aeolian minor. 5-1-1-1-6-5. Hello? It only seems ambiguous because 12-tone Cory's entire harmonic compass is misaligned. So he's focusing on this E, thinking it's the destination. Because it's ending there and kind of resting for a moment, perhaps that's what's leading 12-tone Cory to think, oh, that's where things are resolved. So I'm now going to educate 12-tone Cory with the previously unknown to him concept of resolving a melody on the tonic chords 3. So if the key of the song is C sharp minor like this, okay, that last part of that melody, okay, message in a ball, 5-3, right? that landing there, that's arriving there on the stability of the 3 of the tonic chord, right? Now, there's ample precedent for this. I can even turn 45 degrees and look at Sonic 3's Hydrocity zone. Hydrocity, you know? Hydrocity's melody has a great antecedent consequent phrase. The antecedent phrase starts out where it's going to land and rest on the Dorian sixth. So there's your non-chord tone Dorian sixth, but now the way it's going to resolve is not going down to the 1, but it's actually going to do the exact same thing. It is going to outline the remainder of the triad, starting on 5, and then going to 3 to rest. Right? You've all heard Hydrocity. There's the Dorian 6, and then consequent phrase. Right? That doesn't mean that E is the tonic. Just because the melody ends there, that seems to be enough for 12th tone to say, oh, look where we ended up. It's E. It feels like the end of the road, the logical home base to me, says 12th tone Cory. So if Sega Genesis music contains precedent that would shed light on 12 Cory's erroneous evaluations, it's not instilling any further confidence in the value of the commentary on his channel.
The bass also does something interesting. It starts on A to match the chord, then halfway through the bar it walks down to G sharp. This kind of implies a weak resolution back to the 1 chord.
Or maybe you're overthinking it, and this is as straightforward as Seven Nation Army. Here's the bass line from the Police's song. Okay, and now we'll Seven Nation Army-ifies it. Six, 5. It's not complicated.
Technically, it's still sustaining that A chord from before, but that's quieted down enough that I wouldn't necessarily analyze the two together, so I think this is best viewed as sort of a ghost chord. There's kind of an E major here, but also kind of not.
So, 12th tone Cory, if you're sitting there in your lab and having to just kind of compromise with your evaluations by saying, this is some kind of ghost chord, it's kind of this, it's kind of that, you need a page 1 rewrite, brother. So why 12 Tone's video here is deceptive, uselessly negligent at a minimum, is because the song continues with that same chord progression that started the song, and the guitar solo that kind of plays out the last minute of the song explicitly is operating on a scale and with methods of tension and resolution on none other than C sharp minor, that Aeolian we were talking about before. So what does it say that 12 Tone Cory chose to omit the entire solo afterwards, which includes melodies like this? Right? That is a C sharp minor, scalular warm-up to just climb up to 5 and then come back, dude. It couldn't be more straightforward. And it's like, I am going to now rub your nose in it, 12 Cory, because you've been so deceptive and or negligent with this. There's also the triplets flourish, which is so clearly funneling all the energy back to the tonic of C sharp. You might as well picture in your head the final bars of the Family Guy intro. It's like the ultimate theatrical presentation that ends up arriving at that C sharp the 1. You ready? Hello, do-da-da-da-da-da. You get to the later choruses, and if there is any doubt about what the tonic is, that ambiguity is totally eliminated. This is an elementary school student's my first melody practice, doing obvious things that very clearly highlight the tonal center as C sharp, which, as we've said all along, makes this chord progression a very simple, bordering on garage rock, 1-6-7-4, natural minor. But 12 Tone will not acknowledge this because that would require him to revise the thematic thesis that he maybe established early on in the production of this video. But he wanted to stick to his narrative so that he could be the sage insight deliverer. Okay, so now we've arrived at part 2 of this video, where we are going to further contextualize how a musical mind such as this could arrive at such a skewed data, willfully misleading thesis and conclusion. So listen to the specific choice of words that he uses when chronicling his attempt to identify the tonic or where resolution is provided.
When I listen to the song, the note in the melody that feels most like the root is this E here, so I think we've switched back to the verse key.
The way he's framing it is in itself inherently flawed because he's saying, when I listen to the song, the note in the melody that feels most like the root. And so 12-tone Cory's criteria here is very simply feel, the qualia in his own mind. Now, that feel is certainly something to consider, but the fact that he's describing this as, the way that I tried to figure it out was by listening to it. Well, sure, music is an audio medium, but very little of what we're talking about, or the answers to the questions that we explore in harmonic analysis, very little depends on feel alone. You should be able to make these calculations even just based on looking at the sheet music itself, looking at the contour of notes, which notes happen at what point in time. So much of the data you need to observe in order to decide what is the tonic is information that is contained in the sheet music itself, the set of instructions for the musicians. So if you're just giving this an audio taste test and saying what feels like it's resolved, I mean, if you were a teacher in a college class, Cory, is this how you would conduct the Socratic method with your students? Just debating, oh no, I think it feels like this is the tonic. If it's only based on audio feel, then there's literally no point in talking about any of this. Now, there are times where the feel of the song can sometimes contradict what appears to be plainly evident in the compositional structure itself. Now, I talked about this in my Tidal Tempest music theory video, and that's because that song uses the ninth chord shape so frequently that when you hear the note that is the one, it actually doesn't really feel or sound like the one. It sounds unresolved because your ear by that point has been primed to expect the ninth chord shape, so you almost feel like the two is actually where the resolution is. When it goes to the one, it feels unresolved because you're primed to expect the ninth chord vibe consistently. So while feel is certainly one thing to observe and report upon, it is not the be-all, end-all, unfortunately. But 12-tone Cory just gives it his field test, and he's ready to launch the video into active production. No thesis revisions on the table. And this vocabulary of when I listen was let slip earlier in the video as well.
This confused me for a while because when I listened to the song...
So that's a goldmine of a sentence. This confused me for a while, right? All of your head-scratching questions have very specific answers, Cory. And then to continue that sentence, this confused me for a while because when I listen, okay, but that feel, that taste test is only one aspect. That is not the thing that tips the scales one way or the other. We're looking at the structure, the narrative. When does this or that note arrive, and how does that contribute to the overall arc? So there's a clip from a podcast.
I think partly when you do an analysis, part of the point is to uncover things you didn't already know, right? Like, if I go into a song and only find things that I already expected to find, then what was the point? And so when I look at my analyses, like, I'll think back and be like, oh, hey, this had this feature, or like the message in a bottle analysis that I did where I was like, oh, the verse never plays the one chord, and that has real narrative significance. And people disagreed with me on that. They're wrong. I'm right. That's how music theory works. There is a correct answer, but it's just like,
flag on the play. So with this quote, 12-tone Cory has revealed himself to be one big giant walking cop-out. He can do no wrong because if you ask him what music theory is and how it works, there's no wrong answer. And that seems to be because he is deciding the tonic of the song based on feel during his listen. His direction is dictated solely by his own personal qualia. Now, I'm recording this live in the studio, and I have an audience on the other side of the plexiglass, and I can see their chats. Acrylic Love points out that 12-tone is determining the tonal center just off the melody alone, like as if you were singing in the shower and only evaluating just that lead melody of the vocals as the evidence of where the tonic is. Now, why someone like 12-tone with a music degree could have such a flawed approach, honing in with tunnel vision on the lead melody of the vocals at the expense of the importance of the contributing chordal harmony? It's inexcusable and jarring. The way that he would say, they're wrong, I'm right? He is betraying his egocentric defensiveness, right? In the same breath as saying there's no wrong answer, he is spilling out what he believes is his monopoly on the truth of the song and defending it on the basis that there's no wrong answers. But if there's no wrong answers, then Cory, you almost make it seem like there's no point to any college class where a professor will present a piece of music and ask the class to provide their rationale for what they think is the tonic home base of the song, and then the professor can critique their answer and even the thought process that got them there. But here 12-Tone Cory is saying that no one is wrong, everyone's right, any possible interpretation is valid. But you look at this Message in a Bottle song, Occam's razor would like a word with 12-Tone Cory. Occam's razor would instantly dismiss the fleet of fancy theory that this song never actually goes to the one chord, even though it's got that basic Aeolian minor progression and the melody and the guitar solo in the final portion of the song, which Cory chose to omit, is basically a Fisher-Price My First Melody demonstration of how C-sharp minor works. Okay, so now I'm going to unfortunately show you an additional quote from this Message in a Bottle video that further exposes Cory's very egocentric, exclusive insight, where he can read through the tea leaves and provide this amazing insight to the YouTube audience that you just can't find elsewhere.
It's a fascinating piece of harmonic storytelling using fairly limited tools to sculpt a narrative you can easily follow without even listening to the words. In the end, it's just trying to get home.
Now, there was enough whoppers in this video up until now, and then 12-Tone tops himself. 12-Tone asserts in this moment, right, as a Monday morning quarterback after the fact in hindsight, and say, everything that I just told you about this song that I analyzed, I could have figured that out, teased out those details, and read through that matrix code, even if I didn't hear the lyrics. Now that is a severely inflated claim, and you're going to have to put your money where your mouth is ASAP by showing us literally one case study in which you are able to take a song that was written with lyrics, remove the lyrics, and then you claim to be able to figure out the entire narrative just based on the music, right? And yet everything that he's done here in this video is with full knowledge of what the lyrics and the message of the words are, but he is after the fact saying, yep, I could have divined all that information using my powers of observation, even without Sting's lyrics spelling out the contents. So that is totally unfounded and self-congratulatory. I'm sure that when you watch Jeopardy with 12-Tone Cory, when the credits roll at the end of the half hour, he says, I knew all the answers. And I'm going to dive into this concept in more depth when we inevitably get to the pending video titled, Adam Neely is Not a Musician. In that video, I will explain how he is in fact a mixed media Sudoku specialist, which has significant overlap with music itself, but it imports all these other artificial constructs, interdisciplinary crossovers, arbitrary standards and factors that Adam and perhaps 12-Tone Cory will insist is integral to just the music itself. But then you're going to have Cory step back and say, by the way, everything I figured out, I could have figured it out without any lyrics or any context for Police the Band. So it's moments like these where I start to feel like I'm watching a Rick Beato video that just kind of has the energy of a Howard Stern interview where he's really just focusing on all the salacious tabloidy things about, oh, who got the best record deal at the right time and who soared to the top of the charts to get their platinum albums, of Christopher Moltisanti from The Sopranos, who claims he wants to be a movie director, but when you ask him to talk about the craft, all he really says is, when I go to the movie theater and I see the red carpets and smell that popcorn, I get high on that. It's like he's infatuated with the idea of being a director, losing sight of anything of practical application about making movies. And so, time and again, 12-Tone Cory will reveal this side of his perspective.
They managed an incredibly impressive streak of 5 consecutive #1 albums on the UK chart, charts, with many of their hits crossing the pond to the US as well. They've also had a lot of #1 singles, including Walking on the Moon, Every Breath You Take, and Don't Stand So Close to Me, and looking through the list, I'm noticing a weirdly strong connection between how well the song did and how long its name was.
Yep, so he's succumbing to that Rick Beato infatuation where when he's doing a review of Message in a Bottle and the band The Police and putting that in context, what details catch Cory's attention that he would then choose to spend time in the video relaying to you? Well, he's thinking about the relative success on the charts of this or that single, and then it even occurs to him to rank them in order of how much they commercially climbed to the top of the Billboard charts, and he's now going to spend moments in this video identifying a correlation to the length of the song title. Uh-oh, people. This is a person so preoccupied with his own desire to be himself inducted into the Hall of Fame that he's totally losing sight of what's happening in the music and what's important to focus on beyond his own personal quality of feel stats. And so that's going to bring us to part 3 of this video, where I will now be delivering 12-Tone Cory his sentencing, which will specify specifically what Cory needs to do in order to atone for this situation. So 12-Tone Cory, I hereby sentence you to acknowledging the fact that the tonic of the song is C-sharp and there's nothing ambiguous about it. And in the process of doing so, you must record your voice singing along to the guitar solo in the final portion of the song, singing along to it with your own solfege, or if you just want to identify the numbers as they occur, scale degrees based on the very clear-cut tonic of C-sharp. So for example, 12-Tone could sing along to that solo, do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or he could do it in solfege, do, re, mi, fa, so, fa, mi, re, do. Up to you. You can customize it, but with the clear-cut White Stripes 165, the Fisher-Price blatant melody contours in the conclusion, and the straightforward 4-chord progression, which has nothing to do with the doo-wop changes, you comparing it to the doo-wop changes is just a statistical incidental curiosity that you have imported into the discussion of this song and falsely projected, telling the audience, you expected this to go to an E chord, but then it subverted your expectations. No, Cory, you've done so much prerequisite reading in classrooms and Adam Neely deep dives that you have imported all of this baggage, and it is leading you to suspect zebras when there are in fact only horses. You talk to doctors, and one of their famous expressions, which stems from Occam's razor, is when you have a patient that reports an unusual combination of symptoms, don't get carried away thinking it's some obscure, rare disease that you're going to find an exclusive example of. When you hear footsteps of hooves behind you, think horses, not zebras. This entire interpretation that you've provided is so off base and so at odds with what's happening in the song. So for you to say, oh, it's actually trying to do this other thing, but it didn't, you have forgotten the face of your father. You've lost sight of the basic mechanics of how the tonic and the key of a song is presented in a straightforward fashion. And if it's the quintal harmony that tripped you up at the beginning, bro, all you need to do is listen to launch bass from, what do you know, Sonic 3. Now, when Brad Buxer and the rest of the team that Michael Jackson delegated to make tracks for Sonic 3 created that launch bass track, do you think that they created that vibe and said, I want to do quintal harmony here? Or maybe is that just going from 1, 5, 9? And then getting to the one that you could say is the natural arrival point since it's the established tonic. 12-Tone Cory, and especially the people that watch his content, I caution you not to get seduced by all these fancy vocabulary terms. If someone comes up to you and says, oh, I have triskaidekaphobia, all that really means is that they're afraid of the number 13. They don't have triskaidekaphobia. That's not a pre-existing thing that's registered in the archive of things. All they really have is an irrational fear of specific things that includes the number 13 or 6 or whatever. Stop seducing yourself with all these fancy vocabulary that makes you seem like some seasoned expert when you're really coming up with as many syllables as possible to just describe any possible permutations of how a melody might manifest, such as the clear-cut, as he calls it, quintal harmony that explicitly spells out the very straightforward chord progression that is the heart and core at the beginning and end of the Police's song Message in a Bottle. Imagine if there was a weatherman looking at the temperature throughout the day and he saw it go from 75 and then down to 60 and then up to 63. And he says, oh, there's a word for that. That's called septo-subversion twistage. No, all that is 75, 66, right? You come up with a fancy name for every possible permutation of values. And it's not automatically a problem, but it becomes an issue when said multisyllabic sludge is presented as a substitute for actual commentary, which is in this case preventing 12-tone Cory the Hedgehog from finding his way home to the actual tonic of the song in the key of C-sharp minor. And dude, Sting sings it explicitly at the end of verse 2. We already talked about this. 12-tone is in your life, but 12-tone breaks your heart. And so this has been Alex Yard here at 91.6 WAYZ, the Alex Yard Zone. There's plenty of 12-tone videos I have not yet seen, so I gotta wonder if people have been watching this channel for a long time, or the symptoms we've identified today part of a larger structural problem that pervades his own channel in a way that he can still provide valuable food for thought as far as breaking down the mechanics and the vocabulary. He does have a grasp on some basic elements, but when it comes to synthesizing them together and presenting a takeaway that provides utility and context to the people in the audience, in this Message in a Bottle video, he has fallen short. Have a good afternoon.